Yo, what is up, guys? It's your boy Travis, aka Travesty. Today's video is not a guide, but more of a review of all the endgame builds that I kind of expect to run into or see in uncapped PvP. Some of the caveats here are going to be the consumable choice, and I also have a spreadsheet which kind of goes over, AP versus DR and actually versus evasion when it comes to these endgame builds. Again, though, this is going to be more of just like a theory crafting video, less of a guide. But if you do have any questions on why I chose these builds, feel free to leave a comment. But let's go ahead and get started and go into the evasion build. You'll see that I have a Musa chosen for this build. Musa has an evasion offhand swap, and so that's one of the main reasons why I chose Musa as like the template for this thing. The consumables being used are expensive PvP. We're having DR. I think DR is just a better um, house buff than evasion right now, but of course you could run evasion and get 20 more evasion with 15 less DR. Let's go ahead and go through the builds. You have your full AP evasion build. And then again, the crystals are kind of like my choice of crystals, but again, you could run different crystals for less evasion or more tankiness or more damage. But these are the builds that I kind of expect to see when you run into an evasion build that's hard cap. The hybrid build, pretty simply, is just swapping the DR boots. So the difference between an evasion build is about 1274 evasion, whereas the hybrid has 1202 evasion, but you gain some DR. You go from 615 DR to 660 DR. So hybrid is useful when running into people that have a lot of accuracy, but we'll kind of see a little bit into the in-game theory build, crafting sheet, whatever you want to call it, that I think full AP evasion without the DR boots is actually going to be better in a lot of situations, unless you're running into people that are all running accuracy swaps. The evasion offhand swap, I think this is like reserved for the Ninja, Kuno, Musa, Sage builds that can have this one really strong item, especially given crystal slots are no longer linked. Special attack damage is no longer linked to Black Star. This build is probably going to be one of the most gear checking builds that we go over today. Because even if you do have a lot of accuracy on, the amount of accuracy you need to get through the hit rate calculation is quite high for this build. The Scent Swap is a build that as a gauntlet, I run this build as my tanky build. I think this build is pretty strong. Not as strong as the evasion offhand build, of course, but pretty strong. And then you got your hybrid DR swap. This build is kind of like reserved for trying to gear check somebody. You run one Jin DR crystal instead of running your Centaur swap, and then you also run the DR boots. So you'll see you have like 1182 evasion. They're not going to be like 100% hit rate on you, and then you also have enough DR. If they swap enough accuracy, they might lose the AP to get through your DR check, but we'll kind of go over that in the theory crafting sheet, and I think I'll be updating this sheet quite a bit further down the line as I just have more time. But I did want to release this video for you guys to just digest like all the endgame builds you can run and what counters and all that kind of stuff. The last build is kind of like a meme build. Musas would not run this, but Shies, Mystics, Strikers, they might run this for CC capability and just staying alive. This build is like 1685 evasion with 658 DR. I think there's an argument to run a little bit of DR instead of the evasion, so like 2 Jin DR crystals could be a choice. But I think at this level of evasion, most people are going to have a 10% hit rate against you, no matter what, no matter how much evasion they stack, unless you get mistied. And then once you get mistied, all these builds can get killed by a misty, for sure. And Shy kind of just changes PvP in general, so we're not going to really factor in that. But this is like the full DP build I recommend. Centaur and Rivers instead of 2 evasion crystals, since they give more evasion. But if you wanted to run like a Jin DR swap, you could have Jin DR swaps and the second or third or fourth swap Jin DR. So you run this, and then 2 of your Kharazats could be DR, however way you want to put it. But I think this build, you can also swap the boots to DR. So these are like your evasion builds and the swaps there. Okay, here is our endgame DR builds. Again, most of these builds are going to be tankiness focused, since right now, in my opinion, tankiness is meta. So the first build is your full AP DR build, no Jin DR swap in your Kharazad crystal swap, just full AP, 375. You have quite a bit of AP, quite a bit of tankiness at like 729 DR. Pretty strong build in general. The second build is your first DR swap, and this is the one that I do some theory crafting against. The DR swap 1 and 2. This build is probably reserved more for like a 1v1 setting. And this last build is 2 DR swap. I think this is as low as you'll go when it comes to trying to gear check somebody, unless you're fighting somebody like Seasons level gear. Because once you do another DR swap, you go all the way to 300 AP. And at that point, you're probably either failing DR checks or just don't have enough damage to even make a difference at that point. And at that point, you might as well just be full DR or full DR shy. And that's another build I could put on here. But for right now, I think these are 3 main builds that I kind of see out of the DR tank swap. And you'll see I have a Suckzerker as the base template. Depending on your class, you're going to have different innate DR, evasion, accuracy, all that kind of stuff. So that's why I chose the Suckzerk for the DR builds, because let's face it, we've all been DR checked by some Suckzerk at some point. They have their fearsome tyrant plus 30 DP and plus 20 DP add-on, minus 15 human damage. But again, my theory crafting is not going to include that, but yeah. All right. Endgame builds accuracy. So this is like, I have a Mystic as the basis for this, but you can choose your class and whatever accuracy modifiers you want to go through, etc., etc. I tried to do as least biased as I could when it came to hit rate calculations. I would choose this accuracy build and I would put it against the evasion build, and then I would just go down here. Of course, if you have skill add-ons, you have evasion rate debuffs on skill accuracy rates, this number will change. But in my theory crafting, I have none of that applied. Otherwise, I'd be sitting here forever. So it's kind of more of like okay, I see some increases here and there, but depending on your setup and how you go about it, it's not going to be that much different. And for this one, I run more of the offensive consumables, courage, house AP buff, that kind of stuff. I could run house accuracy buff, but I think for the most part, if you're trying to kill somebody, you want AP. It's good all around. So accuracy swap wise, oh, and also I just wanted to mention that I didn't change these reforged stones to the PvP. Potentially that's something I'll do in the future, but for right now they're PvE based, and I think some of these results will change if I change it to full PvP focused. But until they release reforged presets, I probably won't change it until they release reforged presets, so then you're kind of locked in. But yeah, given that, I could see some of the evasion builds in the theory crafting have 20 more evasion because they run Sov reforged evasion stones. But that's beyond the point. These are the main accuracy swap builds I can see. So the 4 accuracy swap is 12, 13 accuracy and 347 AP bracket with a full deck. I think 4 accuracy swaps is kind of the sweet point for DR. You could argue 5 and 6 accuracy swap, but 1, I just don't have enough of these crystal presets to go through, and then 2, I think at that point, your AP just becomes so low that you are starting to get closer to the point where you failed the DR check. So I think 3 or 4 actually swaps is kind of the sweet point for DR, and we'll kind of go over that in the theory crafting. For evasion, we have 1 accuracy swap, 2 and 3. I think 3 is probably the lowest AP you'll want to go, because after you do this, you'll go even further down to like 332 AP bracket. So 3 accuracy swaps for the evasion build is kind of, I would say, the sweet point. Some would argue even 2 or 1, but it just really depends on who you're fighting, and you'll see that when we go over the theory crafting stuff. Fortunately, every time I scroll, the gear kind of de-levels or up levels, but nothing I can do about that. All right, and then the last build is the glass builds. You'll kind of see that I still have the DEC artifacts that are defense oriented, but the difference is now you have the humans and then full blast crystals here. My argument for still running tankiness crystals, even if you're full glass, is even though you're most likely gonna die to like a CC, the amount of AP you gain from like swapping this to like melee AP, let's say you swap this to ranged AP, you get like 4 AP, 8 AP total versus 24 DR. The trade-off is just pretty bad, I would say. And same thing here, 48 evasion. The trade-off is just terrible. The trade-off is terrible if you run melee AP. So until there are DEC artifacts for offense, I don't think this build will change. And of course, you'll have the glass cannons. And I chose a Suck Ranger for this as the base, because you're not going to tank too much. But again, there's an argument for running like the melee AP or whatever specific AP you run. But until they release DEC, I just don't think it's going to matter too much. I think I'd rather have defensive artifacts with offensive Lightstone sets instead of fully leaning in. Call me crazy, but I think this is just a better setup in general until they release the DEC offensive artifacts. So we went through all the builds. I believe we went through evasion, DR, accuracy, glass. These are all the endgame builds that I envision people would run. You have your splendid protection and destruction stones that I didn't really go through, but those are going to be far and few between until they update the alchemy system. So now we're going to go ahead and go through this extremely long sheet. If you made it this far, congratulations. You really enjoy theory crafting and wanting to see how builds do against each other. So in this sheet, which will be linked in the description below, we kind of like go through the builds against each other. And so for this first sheet, I'm using the DR swap build, this one right here, versus all these different builds here where I have the Garmoth linked to it, right? So this one should link to the DR swap itself, so the same build. Or maybe it's... I might have to update these links, but in general, this is the DR build versus itself. This is the evasion builds versus the DR build. These are the accuracy swap builds versus the build, and then the glass builds, right? So I'll make sure to update these links. I think this is a mistake. These look like the same links, so it should be this one. Yeah. I'll update it, but let me just update it here. So you can see in this tab, it's AP versus DR, and I'm using the formula I use in my PvP AP versus DR calculations to see if I'm failing or passing the DR check. You'll notice another note I make is these are defensive consumables. These are offensive consumables. If you run offensive consumables, there's a good chance you pass the DR check here. like 20 AP from 15 AP from House Buff, 15 AP from Courage. You pass the DR checks here most likely, but here you definitely still fail if you ran full offensive consumables, which makes sense because at that point you're at 325 AP bracket. The bracket's not 325. I think it's 321. And this DR is coming from just one DR swap. So you'll see it's failed about 4 times here. And it makes sense that you're failing on your swaps, your offhand swap, your cent swap, your DR swap. As you can see, the difference between offhand and centaur is quite a big. The amount of AP you can have in an evasion offhand swap is a lot higher than the centaur swap. Looks like about 20. And that's kind of insane how privileged the evasion offhand swap classes are when it comes to like a very end game build. None of these builds fail here, but the interesting part when it comes when you compare it to evasion, so the accuracy swap's not interesting, and then DR glass, of course, you know they're gonna pass. When it comes to 2 DR swaps, so the defender has 321 8 or 325 AP or 321 AP bracket. You'll see that you start failing a lot more. So the first and second swap you fail. I think for this one you need both consumables and house AP buff to pass the DR check, and then it's just impossible at that point. For evasion, you need both. You need offensive consumables to pass. You might be able to run like a defensive house buff, but you definitely need courage and harmony. Here, if you have the EVA offhand swap, it'd be pretty close, but you'd probably need both house and offensive consumables to pass the DR check on somebody who's running 2 DR swaps. And in practice, I would say most of these will fail. Most of these will fail the DR check against somebody who's running 2 DR. But you might be able to beat it with the evasion offhand swap, but you definitely can't beat it with the centaur or your hybrid DR swap. For your accuracy swaps, 4 accuracy, you start failing. So if you're running 4 accuracy swaps to defeat somebody who's running evasion, but then you run into somebody who's running 2 DR swaps, you fail the DR check. Again, this is all, you know, without add-ons, without class modifiers, etc., just based on pure stats, which is AP, evasion, accuracy, and DR. You're pretty close to being the DR check with 1 accuracy swap. But once you start getting to 2 and 3, then you're failing against somebody who's running 2 DR swaps. So that's just kind of an argument for running just 1 accuracy swap, which we'll kind of go over in the next tab. And then DR glass, of course, you can pass. There's enough AP to kill these guys, but because you're running so much AP, your DR is incredibly low. So these DR swap guys can probably kill you either in SA or 100% in a combo, whereas you might not be able to kill them in a 1 combo. So it's just kind of like the argument of there's not enough AP in the game to really get through. And then this last one is just kind of to show evasion's not passing, or evasion's not going to DR check you ever. Even when running all these like swaps, but you can get evasion checked, and we'll go over that here. Now, this one is a little bit harder to do, this tab, primarily because I don't have the formula, or I don't know the formula. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. I just haven't figured it out, and it would have made this a lot easier. But how I did this was I took this, I did PvP hit rate calc. I think I kind of went over this, but I picked this, and then I picked this, and then I just kind of went through to see what the hit rate was. I didn't include any difference between these and these. So with that being said, take this tab with a grain of salt. But I think it's interesting. If at all it's interesting, it might be misleading, considering that all this is manual and You can change your consumables. You can factor in your innate buffs, like evasion. Hash has like a 9% evasion up at all times. Some other classes have like really good evasion debuffs. So this is just base stats, nothing else added into. So as you can see here, you have about 10% hit rate in all these builds if you're running defensive consumables against somebody who's a full AP evasion person. Once you start getting to the accuracy swap stats where you kind of see some accuracy gain, what's surprising to me is like one accuracy swap is just not enough. You still are a minimum hit rate. But once you start going into 2, 3, and 4, you start seeing a gain of hit rate. And the second swap, you only see 3.75% gain. But once you get to the third and fourth, that's when you start having enough accuracy, 1153, 1213, to burn through somebody who's running that full AP evasion build. And your PvP AP is, decently high in the 4 accuracy swap build. I took the PvP AP from the previous tab. You can see it kind of goes down, but when you factor in evasion, that's the best build. Same here. This is the best build. So 3 accuracy swaps is probably what you need if you want to fight somebody else who is evasion. But who knows if they're running hybrid DR and your AP then becomes too low to pass the DR check. Like, I would say for the most part you're passing the DR check, but there's cases where they might have good DR, like striker E buff is plus 50 DR. You definitely fail the DR check if you're running AP this low, essentially. And then the glass builds, if you don't run any accuracy, you're gonna have the minimum hit rate. All right, now this is where it gets kind of more interesting, as you can see. And this, all the attackers basically have a minimum hit rate except the 4 accuracy swap against the evasion offhand swap for the Musa. So the Musa is basically taking 10% from pretty much anybody except somebody who's running 4 accuracy swap. And I think for DR you can run 5 or 6, but then you're losing AP to pass a lot of DR checks. So it's just a matter of how much you want to kill evasion. But as you can see, the first 3 swaps pretty much do nothing. Like 1153, you're not hitting this. Only when you get to like 1213, you see like a 13.75%. And I'm guessing the 5th and 6th swap would also give you a little bit more accuracy in like increments of 10 to 15% more. But those are just guesses. And then evasion swap, you're not killing. Even with 3 accuracy swaps, similar to this, you just don't have enough accuracy to get through this evasion offhand swap. And I would say evasion offhand swap is kind of similar to Centaur swap, but Centaur swap is less evasion. So you'll probably see results here. And that's another one I might add later on as a comparison. But all you really need to do is figure out, well, this one's more manual. So this one's more painstaking. I would have to do this and then run the Centaur build and check the hit rate on all of them. So yeah, more tedious, but I would expect the 3rd swap here and the 3rd swap here to actually impact against the Centaur build. Okay, and then the last build we go through is the hybrid build, and this is like the build that all you do is swap the boots. So the hybrid build is this one. You swap the boots. You kind of see that you actually are above the minimum hit rate, but the hybrid build again has 50 more DR than this 615 DR build. So the stuff that does get through gets reduced by the DR, essentially. And this is what a lot of like endgame evasion players will run in order to counter your build. I would say it's surprising that you still have like a minimum hit rate if you're running like a defensive build, and your hit rate only goes up when you're running the accuracy swap with offensive consumables. As you can see, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th swap for DR is pretty good. You get like a lot of hit rate and AP gain ratio, about 15% after the second swap. And then Evasion kind of follows that same pattern where the first swap gives you 8%, and then the second and third swap give you 15% more each. So double the gains for the second and third, double the gains for the second, third, and fourth swap. So this is kind of where, if you're playing to fight against multiple people you don't know, maybe if you're running accuracy on your DR build, 2 to 4 is recommended. If you're running accuracy on your Evasion build, 2 to 3 is recommended on the Evasion build. Because again, if we look at the DR check, you're kind of failing. You're definitely failing against 2 DR swap, but like I think the most common DR swap you'll probably run into is something with 760 DR. I would say a note I made here is like these are so close to not passing, right? Because the pass this fails and it's 789 PvP AP. This barely passes in 797. It barely passes, and it's offensive consumables. If you're running defensive consumables with these builds, I'm pretty sure you fail all the DR checks. So, yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around, but I'll link all these different builds in the description below. If you guys have any questions or any builds that you like to run, please leave a comment down below, and I'll take a look. But this kind of helped you guys understand like the end game checkers that people play when it comes to builds, because most people at the end game, especially at my gear score, probably have both Evasion and DR swaps. Like what was that, 6 Teflon gods? It's not that hard, and they probably have all the accuracy and hybrid shit to run. So I hope this kind of laid it out for you how or why you're probably getting gear checked in open worlds. Anyways, this has been Travis, aka Travis. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.